On. All right, everybody. Hello. The time is 8:30. It's March 30th. This is a live weather update for what is coming tomorrow. We do have a particularly interesting situation off to our west with severe weather potential. You look at out here and you have a moderate risk for severe weather across Iowa, Illinois, northeastern Missouri, and then in the Arclet in the Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, Missouri region, you have your moderate risk for severe weather once again with tornado potential, damaging wind potential, and hail potential. All severe hazards are appearing quite possible with this setup. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to do a breakdown of exactly how this is going to unfold in the Great Lakes region. Western Michigan and Indiana. I am going to include Western Michigan in here because recent model updates have seemed to indicate that there is going to be a little bit more elevated tornado potential even across parts of Western Michigan as these storms move in, because it will be closer to that upper level low, which could influence the activity that moves through that region. And there could even be some storms firing before the main line even comes in that I was not originally expecting. So we are going to take a look at all the possible outcomes with this based on the current weather models. So here we are. Moderate risk for severe thunderstorms, you can see right here. So let's look at exactly what we're referring to with the HRRR model. Okay, again, 15% tornado risk, significant across those moderate risk areas. Right now you may notice that parts of Indiana, Michigan, Ohio are not necessarily showing that severe weather potential. Hang on, I want to make sure you guys can see my pointer because that will make it easier when I'm actually doing this. Let's make sure it's capturing my cursor. Okay, there we go. Let me refresh it real quick because I think it's not showing it. There we go. All right, so here's your 15% risk area for your tornadoes, hatched area, indicating that it could be F2 to F5 tornadoes or a major tornado event out here. Same with areas to the south. You may notice that western Indiana and parts of western Michigan and western Ohio are included in the 2% risk area for severe weather. I do think, though, that we might see a little bit of an eastward shift with a little bit of this, particularly across parts of Michigan. Again, I'm not going to speak for the SPC on that, but it looks like the soundings are indicating tornado potential more in this region than what was originally anticipated. So we'll take a look at that in the HRRR in a couple of minutes. But wind threat is much more elevated in the area closer to the upper level low. The upper level low is going to be placed around this region around the time these storms begin to really take off and initiate. And then down here, really more along the lines of a tornado threat that could still bring some significant tornado potential. So that's what's comprising that moderate risk. And then you have your damaging wind risks. These damaging wind risks, the hatched areas could be 70 miles an hour or higher wind gusts, so could be rather significant within that region. So hail potential again is focused in this moderate risk area to the north, more significant hail as well. Very potent setup, particularly across Illinois, Wisconsin, and eastern Iowa. So been a while since we've had two moderate risk areas within one outlook that are separated. So very interesting thing to point out. Western Michigan under a slight risk and also a marginal risk as you get into central Michigan. Western Ohio included in the marginal and slight risk. Indiana, slight to enhanced risk, that area that could see more prominent severe weather activity as it moves into the region. So what is making this whole thing the way it is? Well, let's take a look at the HRRR model to get an idea of how things are going to go down. Now, let's zoom in a little bit so you can see it a little better. All right, so this is the current, or this is as of 3 p.m. right here. Okay, so 4 p.m. actually. So you notice that there is a not really too much going on as of 4 p.m. We accelerate over to 8 p.m. What we see is these initial storms firing across parts of Illinois, Missouri. These storms likely will not be severe. You get a sounding out over Illinois. Not really much going on with that. Lots of directional shear, though, starting to come in. Your southerlies and then your westerlies aloft are showing in that particular region. But again, you don't really have much free convection according to the sounding, which really will inhibit these storms from producing more severe activity. But progressing it forward, you do see a bit more widespread thunderstorms begin to move in by early Friday morning. This is at about 6 a.m. 6 a.m. You see pretty much thunderstorm coverage is widespread across Michigan, Indiana, and then starting to move into Ohio at this point. Up here, you're getting your snow, your freezing rain even. I think areas up here will likely see a little bit of freezing rain and snow associated with this storm system that's going to be moving through. So progressing it forward, you do notice that these thunderstorms do end up being in scattered clusters as they get into Indiana. You do notice that low-level wind shear starting to show that that kind of arch shape that we would expect for a tornado event. But again, your stuff is really not in place for this setup just yet. But progressing it forward, 7 a.m. still moving through. We'll start to see some storms initially begin to fire around 9 a.m. around Missouri, and you already see 9 a.m. You already see that you have a very wide area of free convection between your cloud tops, and right next to your cloud bases you have that free convection. Instability is at 1600, and your storm relative velocity is already close to 300. Definitely a decent setup for tornadoes already shown. And all of this is coming together in place for this, but your hodograph really doesn't look super great just yet according to what is being shown here. Really what you want to see, what you would want to see for a better tornado event is something like this, but you don't really see that. So maybe some damaging winds with those little storms moving through. And then what you'll notice is right next to the low is right about here at this point, storms will begin to fire and take off across parts of eastern Iowa. You get a sounding around eastern Iowa. You got that tornado sounding. You got that arch setup starting to come into place. Low cloud bases, directional and speed shear combined within there. Cape values of 700 also showing up. You got a decent setup there for storms to take off and begin to become supercellular in nature, and you can see that they really start to intensify and become a bit more widened out within this region. So there's your tornado sounding once again. There is a very nice arc on that hodograph that you can see there. Cape values of 400, SRH starting to increase as it gets more to that favorable environment, and then cloud bases are very low. Definitely a better setup fostering that tornado potential. And going forward, you do notice, wow, these storms really start to fire quickly right ahead of the low pressure system. So you do notice that this sounding here, you have more directional speed shear. Your cape values are 2500. You do also have a lot of very surface level cape, which can really drive this setup a bit more, and SRH values are around 150 still. Not really as strong of a tornado setup just yet, but you do see that these will likely be more along the lines of your storms that produce damaging winds, and those will continue along and right in front of the low, which you see there. Tornado sounding, you've got your low cloud bases here, cloud bases of and cape values of 2700. Your 3 cape is extremely high, 251. That's a very large amount of 3 cape that you would have, or surface level cape that you will have with that setup. So these storms definitely have a lot of energy to go off of at the surface. Will continue to intensify, move through western Illinois. Interesting thing also to point out is that something new that the models have been showing that was not on it before is storms firing also across southwest Michigan as early as 5 p.m. You get a sounding of those storms. You do show that marginal severe potential. Now, it's not really significant severe potential, but there is still a decent showing for some thunderstorm development. May not necessarily be severe. You do have good SRH. You do have good directional speed shear. Your cape is not. You don't really have much instability in the atmosphere just yet. You're not really in that really as well in that warm sector just yet. But that'll move through. You also have those storms moving through across Grand Rapids region. And interesting thing is that those storms are going to be more elevated up in the atmosphere, higher cloud bases with those. It's definitely going to, higher cloud bases will foster the ability for the storms to not really lose as much energy over the lake. Lower cloud-based storms will. Has anything changed for southern central Indiana for tomorrow? As a matter of fact, I believe it has. So southern central Indiana, let's take a look at that real quick. So this is as we get to 7 p.m. You notice that your new storms are beginning to move right into the Indiana region. Let's get a sounding right in about southern central Indiana, a little bit to the west of that. There's your tornado sounding. Elevated cloud bases. Again, those elevated cloud bases will tell me that it's less likely that a tornado will be produced. It does seem more along the lines that you could see maybe some damaging winds with this storm, but again, can't ever fully rule out a tornado with this type of event. And as we get the storms closer to central Indiana right here, and you get a sounding closer to the storm itself, you do notice those cloud bases do begin to go down. And as we go later into the evening, we're going to lose that sunshine, and that sunshine that's driving more instability to be produced is going to also weaken the storms over time. Okay, they're still in a very favorable environment. You do have the different winds at the atmosphere, which we'll take a look at real quick. Let's actually freeze frame it back at the time those storms are actually moving into the Great Lakes region, so that we don't get confused. All right, let's go back to this point right about here. All right, so we're going to pause it at hour 30. Hour 30, you do have these storms beginning to move in to the region. Let's take a look at the wind values at different levels of the atmosphere. This is what's really fostering a more intense event across much of the regions that are seeing severe weather. You have this upper level trough, and you have a trough ejection that's coming off the southern portion of that, which is greatly speeding up those winds. A burst of strong winds that's moving along this trough, deepening trough at this point, and it's going to be pushing its way into Indiana as these storms move in as well, fostering those storms, or allowing those storms to grow and enable them to still maintain some strength. And also at your mid-layer winds are also very strong, kind of similar in direction, so a little bit less in terms of directional shear between the upper levels and mid-layer, but still very strong speed shear in the atmosphere. And then you see a shift more to the south, and it's actually settling right over Indiana during this time that the storms just begin to move in. It will be windy as these storms move in. You'll have southerly winds that will be moving through. So, and even up to the point where we get to Grand Rapids. That's why I think the risk area is going to kind of really go down once we get up to this region, because you don't have that those lower level winds that you have down here. So I don't think severe weather is going to be really as much on the menu in this area right here. Really, the areas that you see in red and yellow, the stuff that is being projected by the National Weather Service, is what is currently showing up. That's my dog barking, so that's what you hear at the current moment. But let's go back to the severe weather dynamics as these move in. Let's go look at the surface-based CAPE values again. Your surface-based CAPE values, your measure of instability, you have CAPE values about 700. A little bit more CAPE on the back side. That's because these storms are going to lag out a little bit ahead of the front. But you do notice that these storms will move through. I think when you can expect this to be over is when these storms just start to pass. Well, when these first initial storms begin to pass. I really don't think development of intense storm activity is going to occur after the storms begin to pass. Models still could change a little bit, but I don't think that's going to be the case with this. Your 0 to 3 kilometer CAPE above ground level, again, any above ground level CAPE that you have, surface level CAPE, is what we could expect. South Bend, Indiana, actually South Bend, Indiana, I do think has a pretty good chance of seeing some severe storms as we get to this. You get a sounding of before those storms begin to initially roll in, and you still have that tornado sounding, or that tornado hazard type showing up. You do have a little bit of instability in the atmosphere right prior to these moving in, and this is even as we're getting to the point where the sun's starting to go down. But you do have temperatures in the 60s. Despite those temperatures in the 60s, which are cooler, your dew point's at 60 degrees, so you have a fully saturated atmosphere. SRH values or the amount of spin in the atmosphere is at levels 400, 500. Usually we equate storm relative Felicity values of 300 with more intense tornadoes. So the fact that we're at 400 and 500 indicates a tornado that could initiate in this environment could be pretty strong. But again, the tornado threat is less across Indiana because we're starting to lose that energy from the sun as the sun begins to go down. So it still could happen, but it's just something to be watching out for. And then you also have that arc setup. This is why I think the risk area is going to be shifted a little bit to the east. These soundings coming out of Indiana and southwest Michigan as these storms move in are a little bit more concerning than what was seen previously. I do think we could see some decent damaging winds from this, and maybe the potential for a couple tornadoes moving into Indiana and Michigan. So those soundings really get me a little bit more interested in how that could unfold. But here is your significant tornado parameters as they begin to move in. Keep in mind that the storms are right next to the Indiana border at this point. These significant tornado parameters are a bit higher farther back, but that's because the cold front is kind of lagging a little bit behind that point. But these storms are pretty much right here, so you do have your significant tornado parameters of about 1.6, 1.5. Again, not too high of values, but values that are still something to watch out for and be aware of. Supercell composite values also there, about 8, 6, enough to know that there could be the potential for some supercells. Let's look at the possibility of updraft Felicity. Updraft Felicity shows where possible updrafts within cells could form, and also can be equated with there could be a possible setup for a tornado. So you notice these bands, these little noodles that are kind of sticking up all across this region. Those are where your updrafts are going to form, and the stronger the updraft, the more likely a tornado is going to occur. Look at these updraft reports out of Illinois. I do think you could see some strong tornadoes out here given the updraft Felicity that you have out there. Another update from the SPC will likely come out. It comes out pretty early in the morning, around 1:30, 2 a.m. So if you are able to stay up that late, that's when it comes out. But sometimes I get up in the middle of the night and check it out. But that's when their next report will come out, and that'll be the next thing to watch, seeing what the SPC thinks. Given that they have more data and more experience, I would refer to them. But that's what the updraft list is showing for the possibility of updrafts forming within this environment. All right, I'm going to go back to the reflectivity real quick just so you can see the storms. Let's make sure I'm getting everybody's comments on Facebook as well. We're good. All right, let's get back to it. There we go. Okay, so the storms you notice have already passed. We're going back to 6Z. We're actually going to backtrack it again. Go back to your forecast loop. Let's go to a local view. I want to focus specifically on Indiana for a minute, because Indiana is probably going to be under the gun for the more intense stuff moving through, and anywhere in lower Michigan. So again, you see these storms fire about 2 a.m. You already have some scattered thunderstorms moving into the Great Lakes region, and then progressing it a little bit forward. You get to about 7 a.m. You have more scattered thunderstorms. These storms will likely not be severe. You get a sounding near Muncie, for example. Again, you do have low-level wind shear, but you have no factors in place that would enable these storms to become very severe. Continuing until about 12 p.m. noon, these storms finally begin to move out, and then you're in that warm sector where your storms will likely have a bit more ability to become more damaging. So you have these storm cells definitely going to be much more intense farther out to the west. The farther west you are in Indiana, the more intense your storm will likely be. But again, the most intense stuff is going to stay out in Illinois. And then these pop-up cells in Michigan are probably going to be chaseable cells. I may go after those in the afternoon, because those cells were not originally on the models as of yesterday, and I didn't expect them to pop up. But with that new information that's being put into the HRRR, I think that storm right there will be my storm that I keep an eye on as it moves off to the northeast. It does initially begin to kind of form right just southwest of South Bend. Again, this is based on one model, so I would wait to be certain of this storm setting up the way it is. But you do have this cell that seems to tend to intensify as it reaches St. Joseph County, Michigan. St. Joseph County, Michigan, this storm could possibly be a very viable storm to chase. So I might keep my eye on that, and if it's a chaseable one, we'll be on it. But these storms, again, around 8 p.m., you have the storms in parts of Indiana, Lafayette, Indiana, Indianapolis, Bloomington. Storms are moving in, and then by the time we get to 9 p.m., you have the storms over the lake starting to dissipate as you get farther north. Again, the lower to the surface they are, the less likely they will have as much energy, but they will still kind of maintain their intensity and then begin to possibly go on undergo a little bit of reintensification as it reaches the environment that's over the surface of Michigan. Still have that tornado sounding associated with those. I do think these will be more comprised of damaging winds. 10 p.m. they're starting to move into Ohio after dark. You do have a rather intense storm moving into Dayton and possibly Cedarville by around 11 p.m. Maybe an additional development of convection behind that part of Indiana around 11 p.m. as well. And then finally getting done with it by about 1 a.m. and pretty much all is quiet. And then unfortunately, I have to say it, there's probably going to be some snow on the backside of this, particularly in Michigan, and then parts of northern Indiana, northern Ohio. We'll see that snow as well. And speaking of the snow, the Upper Peninsula is going to get a winter storm over the next couple of days. I do want to check on that real quick. So let's go back out to a regional view. Don't want to leave our friends to the north out of this action. So their winter weather, the amount of snowfall that they're expecting with this, lots of snow. You've got probably over a foot of snow across parts of that region, and then total ice accumulations also. You will have some freezing rain across parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and then a little bit of freezing rain across parts of the Upper Peninsula as well. So luckily, areas to the south are not dealing with snow. I'm sure we've all had our fun with the snow and are about done. So we will be happy that we are not dealing with that. But again, I think all of this should be over around 2 a.m. for the areas that are likely to see the most severe weather. But again, keep in mind that Ohio is probably going to still be dealing with these storms as they move through. But the models really have shown some changes over the past couple of hours. I did expect a much later landfall of these storms, but it does look like some of these storms will initiate earlier in the day. So that is going to be something to watch and be aware of as we have daylight. Are there any tornado warnings for cold water or just thunderstorms? So for tomorrow, I would watch in particular this storm right here, okay, in St. Joseph, Michigan. I think that's one we're going to want to watch, and then that's the first round of storms that moves through. Our second round that's going to be moving into parts of Michigan will be late at night, probably around 11 p.m. So 11 p.m. is the time to really watch those storms begin to move in from western Michigan, get a sounding across near Coldwater, and you do have that tornado sounding. The potential for a tornado, that doesn't mean that there will most definitely be a tornado, but it is something to watch. So just keep your eyes peeled for that. It's likely that we'll either get a severe thunderstorm or a tornado watch from this event moving through, but it's something we're going to have to watch. Definitely going to keep a very close eye on this storm across St. Joe County, because I think that's the storm I'm going to get on at about 5 p.m. Let's go to the NAM3K, because I haven't looked at that just yet. What is the NAM3K saying about this particular event? Different model, still provides some valuable insight, but it does tend to play on the more intense side of things, so it's going to show what a more intense storm would look like with the setup that we have. Okay, you got that cluster of thunderstorms moving through in the morning, just as projected, and then there are your initiating storms associated with the actual event. You get a sounding across Michigan with the NAM3K. It's showing a bit more of a messy setup as we get around 7 p.m. and it's showing a later development of storms back in Illinois, but they will still pack some intensity by the time they get to Indiana, and then it shows that Michigan would be more out of the zone of severe weather according to the NAM3K. So again, the NAM3K does tend to view things a little bit differently, but it still does show that potential for those storms to fire and cause some intense weather. I'll stay on here for about a minute or two more for questions before I hop off. Not a problem. But I'm going to go with the HRRR's play for this event. Not really preferring the NAM3K setup I think it'll be moving faster, which is what is shown by the HRRR. Alright, so that pretty much does it for this overall live stream overview of this storm setup. Hopefully this was helpful, and make sure to subscribe, stay updated. I will continue to provide updates tomorrow, and I will also likely be storm chasing. That is a change of plans from before. I did not plan on storm chasing because I do not storm chase at night. That is just clearly not safe. So just stay tuned for that, and thanks again for watching. See you all a little later.